Kia ora and welcome back to Chapter 3. In Chapter 3 we're looking at the purpose of school. What is our new purpose? And we've talked about what happened in the past, and now we're looking at our purpose for school today. And what we're looking at really is in the structure of school. We're talking about how we actually produce, create and develop the competencies in our young people and the capability sets that they need for the 21st century. So the purpose of school is to prepare young people for society in general, not just the workforce, but for their social place, their relationship place, for the familial place, for their sporting places. It's preparing them for life per se, not for one particular thing. And so in our architecture for schools now, our architecture is considering really 4 infrastructural elements. We're talking about technology for learning, we're talking about environments for learning, assessment for learning, and research for learning. We need to be researchers of our own practice to work out what actually makes a difference. So in this resource, we're proposing a whole raft of shifts in what we do as educators, but what we don't want educators to do is take our word for it and say, oh, this must be true. Because in fact, we've actually taken on board things in the past that people thought made a difference in terms of learning, but didn't actually. So we want you to be researchers of your own practice. Technology, its purpose is to develop learning. It's not there as a giant library only. It's a library, it's a great library, but we can use it for actually improving education and learning in many other ways as well. Environments for learning, we've talked about this whole notion of these new learning environments that we're actually producing. And they're there so we can actually work in collaborative spaces for some things, on our own for other things, in a pair for other things, in a reflective sort of process as well. We need different spaces and places to take on different learning processes or different elements of the learning process. And then of course we've got this assessment for learning. Assessment, it doesn't finish the process of learning, it actually develops the process of learning. We constantly need to be assessing for our learning. It's not an end product. Right? Assessment by peers, by educators, by ourselves, gives us some frameworks to say what's the next thing I need to be able to do. So those are our 4 infrastructural elements. The 4 elements that drive our pedagogical practice are shifting as well. Increasingly we're wanting our young people to have agency over their world. And this is a great thing, because what we'd love to do is do ourselves out of the job of managing our young people. And that's why the competencies are so critical to that process. Right? To have agency, you have to have competency. Competency enables agency. And we want our young people to have agency because that makes our life as educators a lot more doable. Because at the moment, your jobs are pretty much impossible in terms of the amount of work you're doing and just the weight of responsibility that's on your shoulders. So learner agency comes from partly through the competencies, that's the major way, but also for understanding what the learning process itself is. And often we've referred in the past to inquiry learning as a sort of a catch-all for this nebulous thing about doing some research and then actually producing something. But what we've done in this resource and the previous one, The Future of Learning, is around defining what the learning process looks like. And schools around the world, here in New Zealand, Australia and overseas, have all helped us define and redefine this learning process. And then what we also want in our 4th element, so we've got competency, we've got the learning process, we've got learner agency, and the 4th element is we want to shift from a context-orientated or content-orientated or thematic curriculum, which has dominated the curriculum right around the world, to a conceptual one. And we want concepts to be at the heart of what we do with our young people. Why is that? Well, because the learning of concepts is equitable if you keep the rote learning to a minimum. You can't delete the rote learning. You need to know things. You need to have experienced things. There's no way around that. But we need to keep the rote learning to a minimum and get that rote learning just in time, not just in case we might need it in the future, but what our activities will actually, our learning activities will dictate what knowledge, content we need to actually understand and know about. So a concept curriculum is about identifying the variables and going, right, here they are. And you can see how these are mapped as you work through the competency resource that we've produced here. Each of the competencies have been unpacked into competency frameworks, and then the frameworks have unpacked into a series of sequences, and which we'll talk about in more detail later. But for now, we just need to be aware of the 4 infrastructural elements: technology for learning, research for learning, assessment for learning, and environments for learning. Okay, all about learning. It's not about remembering and tests, it's about learning. And then we've got our 4 pedagogical elements: the competencies, the learning process, having learning agency, and this conceptual curriculum. So we've got 4 and 4, and you can have a read through in the resource and obviously see from the diagrams how this comes together. So all the best with that, and we'll see you soon in the next chapter. Right here. Thanks very much.